At a crowded train station, a young black woman made a split-second choice to help a struggling blind stranger that cost her everything she'd worked for. But what she didn't know was that this single act of kindness would circle back to her in the most shocking and life-changing way imaginable. Where are you watching from? Comment below before we dive into today's story. The freezing morning air cut through Annabelle's jacket as she rushed through the packed crowds at Chicago Union Station. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The folder in her hands held everything. Months of hard work, sleepless nights, and her one shot at changing lives in her community. The giant clock above the platform read 8:57 a.m. 3 minutes until her train left. If she missed it, her dream would die. Then she saw him. An elderly white man with silver hair stood frozen near the train doors. His white cane trembled in one hand, a heavy bag pulling at his shoulder. Dark glasses reflected the station lights. He couldn't see the chaos around him. The rushing crowd pushed past without caring. Suddenly, his cane got stuck between the platform and the train. A woman yanked it free without looking and disappeared. The old man stumbled, lost and helpless. 8:58 a.m. Annabelle's future waited on that train. But so did he alone, scared. One step from falling. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them. "I've got you," she said, steadying his arm. She lifted his bag higher and guided his hand to the railing. The crowd pressed against them, but she shielded him with her body. "Which platform?" she asked quickly. "5," he whispered. Platform 5 was on the other side. Annabelle's chest tightened, but she began guiding him through the mob. Her breath came fast as they fought against the tide of people. They reached his train, just as the conductor's whistle blew. She helped him to the door. "Thank you," he said softly, turning toward her voice with the faintest smile. Behind them, the hiss of closing doors cut through the air. Annabelle turned to see her train, her one chance, pulling away into the gray morning. Her heart sank as the lights disappeared into the fog. She had traded her future for his safety. "You're welcome," she whispered. 2 hours later, Annabelle stood outside the closed meeting room in Milwaukee. Through the glass, she saw another team presenting their project to the council. Her own teammates sat in the back, hope dying in their eyes as she entered. "I missed it," she whispered. Keisha, the oldest member, squeezed her hand. "We'll find another way." Good projects don't die from one missed meeting. But as Annabelle watched the winter light fade outside, she wondered if her sacrifice would ever mean anything. A week later, Annabelle pushed through the doors of the Detroit Public Library. Warm air wrapped around her like a hug, carrying the smell of old books and fresh coffee. She had come looking for research materials, hoping to rebuild what she'd lost. The lobby buzzed with activity. A sign announced a special reading session for blind people and children with disabilities. Volunteers arranged chairs and set out cups of hot cocoa. Walking toward the main collection, she froze. There he was, the man from the train station. Same white cane, same heavy bag, moving carefully down the hallway. A young librarian juggled a stack of audiobooks nearby. "We'll just go down these stairs, sir," he said, heading toward narrow steps. The elevator behind them had an out-of-order sign. The old man tapped forward carefully. In a careless moment, the librarian's elbow hit his bag. Books scattered down the stairs like falling dominoes. The man's balance wavered, his foot reaching for empty air. Annabelle's heart jumped. She ran forward, catching his arm before he could fall. "I've got you," she said again, the same words from that morning at the station. His cane rattled against the railing, but her grip held him steady. She crouched to gather the scattered books, large print editions and braille volumes with raised dots that caught the light. "Let's go slow," she said, guiding his hand to the railing. Step by step, they descended together. At the bottom, he exhaled deeply. "Thank you," he said, turning slightly toward her. "We seem to keep meeting when I'm about to fall." Annabelle smiled. "Maybe the world wants to make sure you get where you're going safely." He chuckled warmly. "Maybe it does." They entered the reading room together. Children filled the chairs, their eyes bright with wonder as a storyteller read aloud. In the corner, a boy in a navy sweater sat in a wheelchair, hands folded in his lap. When he caught Annabelle's eye, he smiled shyly. After the session ended, the old man turned to her. "Would you join me for tea? I'm Robert, by the way." "I'm Annabelle," she replied. "And yes, I'd love some tea." They settled in a quiet corner by the windows. Robert poured carefully, his weathered hands sure despite their slight trembling. "What made you choose this work?" he asked, sliding a cup toward her. Annabelle stared into the steam rising from her tea. "When I was 16, my brother Marcus had a car accident. He never walked again. Finding a school that would accept him wasn't easy. Doors kept closing, sometimes politely, sometimes not. I learned how invisible people become when places aren't built for them." Her voice grew stronger. "I promised myself I'd work to change that, even if it was just in one city." Robert listened with the kind of attention that made her feel heard. "That explains everything," he said quietly. As they talked, a woman approached, elegant in her 50s, with kind but cautious eyes. "Ready to go, Dad?" she asked. "This is my daughter, Margaret," Robert said. "Margaret, meet Annabelle." They shook hands briefly. Margaret's smile was polite but guarded, as if she was measuring Annabelle somehow. 3 days later, Robert called. "Would you join us for dinner Friday?" Nothing fancy, just a chance to talk more. That Friday evening, Annabelle walked up a brick path to a cozy house on the quiet side of Detroit. Warm light spilled from the windows like liquid gold. Robert opened the door with a welcoming smile. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the air. Inside, books lined every wall, and a fire crackled in the hearth. Margaret appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "You must be Annabelle," she said, her voice pleasant but reserved. Over dinner, Robert shared stories of his younger days working with newly blind adults. "It's not just teaching them to read Braille or use a cane," he said. "It's convincing them, and the world, that they still matter." Annabelle talked about her project, her voice growing passionate despite her efforts to stay calm. She spoke of ramps leading to locked doors, signs too high for wheelchair users to read, and how small changes could mean independence. Margaret stayed mostly quiet, asking careful questions about Annabelle's background and goals. Her eyes never left Annabelle's face, as if cataloging every answer. Later, by the fire, Robert showed Annabelle his collection of books on disability rights and inclusive design. "These have shaped how I see the world," he said with a gentle smile. "Take them. I think they'll help you." When it grew late, Margaret walked Annabelle to her car. The night was crisp and clear, their breath forming white clouds in the cold air. "Thank you for coming," Margaret said at the curb. "Dad doesn't invite many people over these days." There was something in her tone, curiosity mixed with careful observation. "I'm glad he called," Annabelle replied simply. She drove away with Robert's books in her lap and warmth in her heart, unaware that the evening had planted seeds that would soon change everything. The morning of the announcement arrived gray and still. Annabelle sat on the bus to the community center in downtown Detroit, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She told herself she was only observing, learning for next year. But her heart knew the truth. She still hurt from losing her chance. The community hall buzzed with excitement. Coffee steamed from tables in the back, and blue banners reading, "Innovation for Inclusion," hung from the ceiling. A man in a suit welcomed the crowd, then said, "Please welcome our special guest, Mr. Robert Whitman." Annabelle's breath caught as Robert walked carefully onto the stage, guided by a volunteer. He gripped the podium with steady hands. "How many of you," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "have ever been helped by a stranger? Not in some grand way. Just a small act when you needed it most." The room fell silent. Robert told them about the morning at the train station. How he'd been lost and stumbling, his cane stuck, his balance failing. "Someone grabbed my cane and handed it back without really seeing me," he said. But then another voice came, calm and steady. The next thing I knew, I was being guided to safety. No rush, no fuss, just care. Annabelle felt heat rise to her cheeks as the memory flooded back. He spoke of a library incident too, how books had scattered down the stairs and the same steady hands had caught him before he could fall. "We build communities on these small, unseen acts," Robert concluded. "You may forget the details, but you'll always remember how it felt to be treated like you mattered." The applause was thunderous. Some people stood. Robert nodded gracefully as the volunteer helped him down. Then Margaret appeared on stage, dressed in a sharp blazer and carrying a folder. Annabelle stared in shock. She'd had no idea Margaret was involved with the selection committee. "This year," Margaret began, her voice strong and clear, "we received extraordinary proposals. It is my honor to announce that one of our 3-year grants goes to a project that challenges us to see public spaces with new eyes." Annabelle's ears roared with rushing blood. That project belongs to Annabelle Johnson. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then she stood, the applause washing over her like a wave, and walked toward the stage on unsteady legs. The first community event funded by the grant was everything Annabelle had dreamed. The hall filled with laughter as children explored tactile books and adults tested new Braille signs. Robert sat in the second row, Margaret beside him, both smiling proudly. Annabelle had planned to stay in the background, but suddenly she was called to the stage. People began standing, sharing how the new programs had changed their lives. Then Robert took the microphone one last time. He told the full story. The train station, the library, the stranger who chose kindness over convenience. "It's not the size of the help that matters," he said, "but the care behind it. And that care grows." As the speeches ended, a small voice called Annabelle's name. She turned to see the boy from the library, rolling his wheelchair forward with determination. He held a microphone in both small hands. "Thank you, Miss Annabelle," he said clearly. Her breath caught. She knelt beside him, taking his hand gently. His grip was warm and surprisingly strong. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't look away. Around them, cameras clicked, but Annabelle only saw this brave boy's steady gaze. All those small moments, the train station, the library steps, every choice that had seemed insignificant had led to this. Kindness, she realized, had a way of circling back when you least expected it. Sometimes what felt like sacrifice was really just the beginning of something beautiful.